7 days. 7 days inside this tin can, sweating, loading, listening to the gun on my left, tearing the air every time Kraus squeezed the trigger. 7 days of detonations that leave your head ringing long after everything has stopped. I no longer remember what it feels like not to have my ears ringing. There is something that happens to the body after enough time inside a tank in combat. It is not habituation. That word implies you have gotten better at dealing with something, and that is not it. It is closer to what happens when you walk into a kitchen with a very strong smell, and a few minutes later you no longer notice it. The smell has not gone. Your nose has given up warning you. The body learns not to spend energy processing what it cannot change. The shots, the smoke, the constant heat, the sound of metal working under tension. After 7 days, they existed somewhere on the periphery of consciousness, like the sound of your own heartbeat. Always there. Irrelevant until they were not. On that morning of the 12th of July, I woke with my face pressed against the cold armor, and for one full second did not know where I was. It was not the first time. It was probably not the last. Hannes, our driver, was snoring something just below me, an uneven snore with gaps in the middle that made me think it was about to stop, and then it would start again. Someone, I do not know who, had lit a cigarette somewhere outside. The smell came in through the gaps and mixed with the old oil and the reek of sweat that all the ventilation in the world could not pull out of here. The inside of a tank smells of many things at once. Lubricant, hot metal, the meal someone ate 3 days ago whose trace persists in no identifiable place, the sweat of 4 men who sleep, eat, and work in the same space that fits 4 men tightly, with no windows, no air that enters without first passing through the filter of everything that has already happened in here. After 7 days, that smell had become the normal smell. The outside air, when we opened the hatch at night, was the one that smelled strange. I did the accounting. That morning we had 2/3 of our ammunition. Enough. By this point I no longer thought of these things as things. They were just figures that existed somewhere in my head, like the time or the temperature outside. 30-something degrees, perhaps. The sky was overcast, humid, the kind of morning that promises to be worse by afternoon. I had learned to read the heat through the behavior of the armor plate. In the morning, it still holds the cold of the night for an hour, maybe 2. Then it begins to warm from the inside out, or from the outside in. I could never quite say which, and the interior becomes something different from what it was in the early morning. We had nothing to do until later. That was the plan. Today was supposed to be a day of relative rest. Of course it was. I heard them before I saw them. It was not noise. It was a vibration. Something that rose from the ground and entered through the heels, through the metal of the floor, through the soles of the boots, as if the earth were chewing on something very large, very far away, but getting closer. I have thought about that since then. That specific sensation of receiving information through your feet before you receive it through your ears. The ground knows things before we do. How long had the ground been trying to warn us that morning? How many minutes before the flares went up had the earth already known what was coming? Kraus heard it too. I watched his head turn slowly to the east, the same animal gesture I make when I am not sure whether what I hear is real. Kraus had that instinct more developed than anyone I had ever known. 6 months on the Eastern Front does that to a man, or it kills him before it can, one of the two. Kraus was alive, so the senses worked. When Kraus turned his head in a particular direction with that specific gesture, everyone in the turret took note without anyone saying a word. Then the flares, purple, several at once, in arcs, out toward our forward positions. I'd never seen so many warning flares fired at the same time. Normally it was 1, 2, sometimes 3, a local warning, a prod at the flank, something contained. That morning the sky filled with purple. It was a beautiful thing if you did not know what it meant. I knew what it meant, and even so, for a fraction of a second, I watched the arcs of light with something resembling admiration. I do not know what that says about me. The lieutenant said something I could not make out properly through the intercom, but the tone was enough. Hannes started the engine before any direct order. The roar of the engine warming up made everything shake in here. The walls, my jaw, my teeth. That vibration I knew so well, I barely felt it anymore. But now there was another vibration on top of it, coming from the east, much larger. There was a photograph. I do not know why I thought of it at that exact moment. My mother on the balcony at home, wearing the striped apron she always wore on Fridays. A complete sharp image that appeared without my calling for it and vanished the moment Hannes accelerated. It was not the first time it had happened to me, that sudden appearance of something completely irrelevant, even when everything around you is screaming that irrelevance is a luxury that does not exist. I talked about this with Dieter once at night, when neither of us could sleep. He said it was the brain trying to escape. I said that if the brain wanted to escape, it should have chosen a different line of work. We both laughed, quietly so as not to wake the others, and then were silent for a long time. You cannot see anything from in here. That is the part no one understands when they ask us what it is like. They imagine we are sitting inside, watching the battle like a theater. No. I am in a metal compartment with the gun to my right, the breech to my left, shells behind me on racks that creak every time we break, and an observation slit that lets in exactly enough light for me to know whether it is day or night. That is all. Everything else arrives through sound, through smell, through the way the floor transmits impacts. You learn to build a map of what is happening outside from fragments, the angle of a shot, the interval between the flash and the detonation you feel in your ribs, the direction the smell of burning rubber is coming from. It is an imprecise map, full of gaps, frequently wrong, but it is the only one you have, so you build it from what there is and do not think too much about the parts that are missing. That morning, what arrived first was a sound I cannot describe with precision even now. Hundreds of diesel engines, not one after another, all at once in a block, as if the entire horizon had decided to come in our direction. There is a difference between hearing many engines and feeling many engines. When there are enough of them, when they reach a certain number I cannot name, they stop being individual sounds and become a pressure. Something that pushes against the eardrums from the inside out. I did not know how many there were. There was no way to know. There were many. There were too many to count, even if I had been able to see them, which I could not. Kraus said something to the lieutenant that I could not hear because the engine was too loud. The lieutenant said something back that I also could not hear. Then the tank moved forward. We crossed the Pioneer Bridge over the anti-tank ditch. I felt it creak beneath us, that pause when the tracks leave the wood and come down again on the earth on the other side. I knew that creak. In the last 7 days, we had crossed that bridge more times than I could remember. In the morning, in the afternoon, once at night with the lights off, because there was artillery activity to the east, and the lieutenant did not want to give them targets. Every time I crossed it, there was a fraction of a second where I wondered whether the pioneers had built it to hold our weight one more time. So far, it had held. The probability of it continuing to hold was either staying the same or decreasing, depending on how you looked at things. I preferred not to think about that. And then we went up. And that was when Kraus fired for the first time. The recoil of the gun is something I never got entirely used to. 7 days of combat, and it still caught me by surprise. The breech slams back with a brutality that is not auditory. It is physical. It drives itself into your chest like a fist. The compartment fills with blue powder smoke in under a second, and the ventilation is not fast enough. It is never fast enough. That smoke has a taste, bitter, chemical, something that stays in the mouth and throat long after the smoke itself has cleared. I learned to breathe in a specific way during combat, short through the mouth, let in as little as possible. It does not work very well, but it works better than breathing normally. Grab the empty casing, open the breech. Casing out, fresh round in, closed, loaded. That was my job. That was all there was. Kraus fired again before I had time to tell whether the first shot had hit anything. And again, and again. The pace accelerated in a way that told me there was a great deal to hit. Too much. My hands worked on their own. Casing, round, close, loaded, while my mind was somewhere else, trying to piece together what was happening outside through the sounds. There were tanks burning. I could tell by the smell coming in through the gaps. Rubber burning, something heavier, more acidic. Diesel. Paint. That specific smell I had learned to recognize after the third or fourth tank I had seen destroyed. A smell I cannot compare to anything from ordinary civilian life. It is a smell that has no name in the language of people who were not here. It is the smell of a machine dying. It is unlike anything else, and when I encounter it again, and I have encountered it after this war in completely different and completely impossible situations, the body reacts before the mind understands why. The floor shook in a different way. Not the diffuse tremor of the engines, an impact, concentrated, close. Close enough to make me stop for half a second before my arms resumed their movement on their own. Someone shouted on the intercom. I could not make out the words, but I understood the tone, and then the impact, like a giant's hammer blow against the outside of the side armor. My body hit the wall before I understood what was happening. The sound was a blow that is not quite a sound. It is a pressure wave that strikes you all at once. The ears, the chest, the eyes, as if the air inside the compartment had become suddenly and briefly solid. There was smoke. I do not know from where. There was smoke all at once, and I was checking my limbs by instinct without being aware of doing it, hands moving along my arms, my chest, looking for anything hot or wet that should not be there. Nothing. The lieutenant was shouting something. The engine had not stopped. The engine kept running. The tank did not burn. It took me time to understand that. Several seconds, maybe more, maybe less. Time does strange things in these situations. To register that the engine was still running, that there was no fire, that the heat I felt was the usual heat and not the heat of something that should be worrying me considerably more. There is a specific kind of heat that enters when armor gives way to a shell. I had learned to recognize it. That heat, in that moment, was not that. It was just the July summer and 4 men working in a space too small for them. The side skirt armor had taken the impact. It had probably deflected. Probably, that word did a great deal of work in that moment. The same work it always does when you do not have enough information but need to keep functioning as though you do. Kraus said something back toward me, in my direction without turning. I could tell by the way he said it that he was all right. There was a subtle difference in Kraus's voice when he was all right and when he was not. A tension in the throat. A slight shift in register that had taken me days to identify and that I now recognized without thinking. That sentence I could not make out had the tone of someone who is all right. I went back to work. Casing round, close, loaded. Outside, the noise had stopped being individual noises and had become a single, continuous thing, without gaps. Explosions, engines, the metallic impact of shells glancing off steel, the drier sound of those that did not glance off. I had learned that distinction on the first day. A shell that ricochets, a long sound, almost musical, moving away. A shell that does not, a short crack, and then nothing. Or worse than nothing. The smell of rubber and diesel and cordite had grown so thick in here that I began breathing through my mouth. It did not help much. At some point, Hannes swung the tank sharply to the left, and I lost my balance, hit my shoulder against the gun breech, felt no pain in the moment. There is no pain in the moment. That is another thing no one understands. The pain always comes later, when the body decides there is room for it. Dieter had an explanation for that. He said that when you are working in earnest, the body stores the pain for when you have time to feel it, as if pain were a parcel waiting at the door until you have free hands to receive it. I never knew whether it was true, or whether he had invented it to seem more intelligent than he was. But in that moment, with my shoulder beginning to pulse very faintly, somewhere on the edge of what I could process, it seemed to me the most accurate description of anything I had ever heard. Krause kept firing. I kept loading. I do not know how long it lasted. I had no watch where I could see it. There were no windows. The only measure of time I had were the casings passing through my hands, each shot a unit of something that was not quite time, but served to measure the duration of all of this. I counted to a certain point, and then lost count, and then stopped trying to count. My hands knew what to do without numbers. When the rate of fire slowed, it did not happen all at once. It was gradual. Krause waited longer between one shot and the next, then longer still. The gap between detonations grew the way the gap between thunderclaps grows when a storm is moving away. And I noticed this with the part of my mind that was still functioning as an observer, as someone watching from outside, and thought that it was a strange comparison to be making in the middle of a battle. And then Krause stopped. Silence fell. Not a real silence. Outside there was still noise, there were crackles, there was the engine of something burning with that sound of metal yielding to heat. There were voices in the distance I could not distinguish. But compared to what it had been a few minutes earlier, it was silence. It was the silence of a room after the music stops, the absence so present it weighs more than what was there before. I was soaked through completely, shirt, trousers, everything. My hands slipping slightly each time I had grabbed for a shell casing. The inside of the tank was at a temperature I cannot describe precisely. It felt as if the air had gone solid, as if breathing required more effort than it should. My lungs were working, but the sensation was that what was coming in was not quite air. I had the absurd urge to check whether my matchbox was still in my shirt pocket. I do not know why. I was not smoking that day. The matchbox was a habit from the early months. I carried it because the man who had taught me everything I know about loading a gun always carried one, and he told me once it was the only thing he had never lost in 2 years on the Eastern Front. He was transferred to another regiment in March. I heard nothing more of him. But the matchbox stayed with me, in the same shirt pocket, and I put my hand there and confirmed it was still there. And that seemed important to me for a reason that makes no sense now. The lieutenant said something. This time I understood the words. He was asking whether we were all right. Krause said yes. Hannes said yes. I said yes. Dieter also said yes, but said it in a way that was not entirely convincing. A fraction of a second too late, the tone slightly higher than usual, the way you answer a question when you have not had time to verify whether the answer is true. For a fraction of a second I looked at him and he nodded, and I understood that he was not lying. He was simply wearing the same expression we all were, the expression of someone who has been through the same thing as everyone else and is still taking inventory of the pieces to confirm they are all there. Nobody asked what had happened outside, not because we did not want to know, but because in that moment there was no answer I could have processed. The Russian tanks had come, and then they had stopped coming. That was all I knew for certain. Had we won? Had we lost? Had we advanced? Had we fallen back? What do those words mean when you are a loader in a Panzer IV and your perspective on the world is exactly the width of an observation slit? The battle had happened 3 meters from me in every direction, and I knew no more about its outcome than someone who had been 100 kilometers away. That is another thing I have never been able to explain properly to anyone. Hannes switched off the engine. The silence deepened. My shoulder began to hurt in earnest, slowly as always. First a vague awareness that something was not right, then a location, then a growing intensity that I let exist because there was no longer any reason not to let it exist. Dieter had been right about that. The parcel had been waiting at the door, and now there were free hands. Outside, somewhere close, someone, German from the accent, was saying something to someone who was not answering. The voice had the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent enough time in combat to no longer be able to pretend they are fine. It was not despair. It was something more ordinary, and in a certain way heavier than despair. The tone of someone who keeps doing what needs to be done because it needs to be done, without enthusiasm or fear or anything that would have made the moment dramatic. Just exhaustion, just the work still to be done. I knew that exhaustion. I had learned it somewhere in the last 7 days, and I knew it was going to take much longer than one night to unlearn, perhaps longer than a week. Perhaps longer than the time I could imagine while sitting in that metal compartment with the empty casings scattered across the floor around me, like the remains of something that had happened and that there was now no way to undo. The matchbox was still in my pocket. I do not know why, but that still seemed important to me. But in that moment, in that exact moment with the engine stopped and the heat beginning to dissipate very slowly and my shoulder aching with that honest pain of something that had been struck and had not broken, there was only the weight of my hands in my lap and the physical, concrete, almost surprising awareness that I was still here. Just that. For now, just that.